are known as blinks. It might include some of you here, maybe not. And there's hundreds of millions of them around the globe. When they speak, a generation listens. This is their message to all of you, world leaders here at COP26, and they hope that you bear it in mind during the course of today.
Hi, this is Blackpink. Almost a year ago, at the Climate Ambition Summit, we spoke of our journey to learn more about climate change, because we are convinced that this is the most important issue of our time.
การเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศเป็นเรื่องจริงที่กำลังเกิดขึ้น เราได้เรียนรู้เกี่ยวกับการเปลี่ยนแปลงที่ร้ายแรงต่อธรรมชาติสภาพอากาศทั่วโลกและอากาศที่เราหายใจการเปลี่ยนแปลงที่เรากลัวนั้นกำลังเริ่มที่จะส่งผลกระทบกับโลกของเราแล้ว
We have learned that we must act now, urgently, to prevent much worse.
그래서 오늘 글래스고에서 저희의 메시지를 전하게 되어 매우 자랑스럽습니다. 기후 위기에 대응하기 위해 모인 전 세계 리더님들께 부탁드립니다. 우리의 지구를 지금 또 앞으로도 계속 지킬 수 있도록 꼭 필요한 결정을 내려주세요.
6 years ago in Paris, he pledged to do just that to limit global warming ideally to 1.5 degrees. The recent UN panel on climate change warned that this opportunity may be slipping from our grasp.
หากอุณหภูมิโลกสูงขึ้น 2 องศาจะมีผลกระทบอย่างรุนแรงต่อผู้คนและธรรมชาติในทุกมุมโลก 1 ใน 3 ของประชากรโลกจะต้องประสบกับความร้อนจัดเป็นประจำนำไปสู่ภัยแล้งปัญหาสุขภาพและการเสียชีวิต
Almost all warm water coral reefs would be destroyed, and sea ice would melt and devastate wildlife.
우리는 그런 서술 수 없는 상황이 오는 것을 두고 볼 수만은 없습니다. 무엇보다 우리 모두가 책임의식을 가지는 것이 중요합니다. 모두가 함께 하지 않으면 기후변화에 대응할 수 없기 때문입니다. 우리가 지금 실천하고
หากพวกเราทุกคนก้าวขึ้นมาด้วยความมุ่งมั่นที่แท้จริง
If you world leaders seize this vital moment at COP26,
We can still realize what was promised in Paris 2015. We can still save our planet. We can still save our future.
as COP26 advocates, we hope you will seize this opportunity. We,
Blackpink,
And Blinks, our fans,
our generation
our world,
will be watching and hoping.
Let's work together for our planet and take climate action in your area.
There you have it, a message from Blackpink, but also their fans Blink, that they will be watching. No pressure then. But next it gives me great pleasure to introduce high-level champion Nigel Topping.
Thank you, Allegra. Before we start the high-level segment, I'd like to welcome some leading non-state actor voices on stage to showcase the actions already underway to advance a transformative resilience in vulnerable communities. We're going to hear from Celine Lim, climate warrior and poet from the Marshall Islands, from Jean Leone, the president of the Caribbean Development Bank, and from Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, on financing a catalytic transition in small island developing states. And to start, it's my pleasure to introduce Celine Lim, climate warrior and poet from the Marshall Islands. Celine, over to you.
Yagoyangan go Moaleb. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies, gentlemen, and genders, good morning. As you have recognized, our large ocean nation and the late great Tony de Broom made an outsized contribution to making the Paris Agreement a reality. Here in Glasgow, we expect again for the High Ambition Coalition to ensure that the world delivers fully on the promise of Paris. In the eye of the climate crisis, which affects every aspect of the Marshallese way of life and livelihoods, we must tackle this alongside other challenges like unemployment, poverty, and health concerns. Education and indigenous knowledge are the first step to addressing these challenges. An example of this is through the GIZ-funded initiative with One Island in Mayal, which uses our traditional canoe designs for developing new forms of sustainable sea transportation. As a youth of the Marshall Islands, I know firsthand the need for collaboration in building resilience and implementing equitable, inclusive, and interconnected climate solutions in small islands. Our government has been spearheading the engagement of youths at every level of decision-making through the creation of the Guan-Gesh Pledge. I encourage other countries to sign up for this pledge. If the Marshall Islands achieve its goal for 100% renewable energy, it will mean that our families will stop experiencing power outages on a weekly basis and free up government resources for our people's most important needs, like health and education. But to achieve that, communities, organizations, and institutions that need to build their capacity, we must draw on the wisdom of our Pacific Island leaders and share our successes in return. And we need collaboration between island communities, donors, and project developers to build projects that really reflect the priorities of our communities. It is through this type of collaboration that we can make SIDS more resilient to climate change and support all generations of island communities. As our great champion Tony DeBroom used to say, the thought of having to give up our islands is repulsive to us. But if we save the Marshall Islands, we will save the world. I would like to now welcome the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Jean Leone. ¿Cómo está?
Thank you, Selena. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Small island developing states are at the forefront of climate action, even while we face some of the worst impacts from sea level rise, storm damage, and loss of coastal ecosystems. For the past 40 years, islands have been battered by natural hazards, yet access to finance remains completely inadequate. To better finance our development needs, we need to address economic recovery, climate action, and human welfare. Partnerships will be critical. The Caribbean Development Bank, along with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Green Climate Fund, therefore proposes the creation of a multi-donor financing facility to spur public and private investment, including in climate solutions and resilient infrastructure and institutions. This will include a framework to measure and adjust finance based on the cost and duration of recovery from natural hazards. This partnership model, which could be emulated in the Pacific, will develop new financial instruments to de-risk and mobilize capital, to leverage public funding to catalyze private financing, direct funding towards resilient mitigation and adaptation projects, and integrate long-term capacity development through committing to specific reforms. This investment vehicle will contribute finance to the estimated 130 billion needed across Caribbean and Pacific SIDS to achieve 90% renewable energy by 2040. Our islands do not want to stop there. We need to target sustainability, equity, and resilience as we focus on infrastructure, energy systems, institutions, communities, and ecosystems. In addition, another initiative that will mobilize finance in islands for mitigation and adaptation is the Climate Finance Access Network. This initiative is being launched in the Pacific Islands of Fiji, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, the Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu, and will accelerate the development of projects and help structure financing for impactful mitigation and adaptation projects. Now, I would like to welcome Brian Moynihan, President of Bank of America, to announce exciting action his institution is taking to accelerate actions in seeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leone. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's an honor to be here on behalf of my 200,000 teammates at Bank of America. Our company is working to help drive the transition to a low-carbon, sustainable future we all want. We have pledged to achieve net zero emissions in our financing, our operations, and our supply chain by 2050. To get there, we'll provide $100 billion per year in financing through 2030, over $1 trillion to the effort. I also have the honor of serving as co-chair to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales in the Sustainable Markets Initiative, or what we call the SMI. The SMI is a private sector-led effort to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy. It's a coalition of the willing, 200 CEOs, to helping mobilize transitional capital for key projects and geographies. One of the areas of focus for the SMI are the small island developing states. Exposure to environmental and social risk factors, as my colleagues have talked about, combined with insufficient access to capital, makes these regions some of the most vulnerable in our world today. Working through the SMI and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, Bank of America is deploying its human and financial capital to help these nations to a cleaner, more sustainable future. I'd like to share an example of a project that we're working on right now. This is mobilizing private sector capital in creative ways. We're working with one of the largest clean energy developers in the regions to support the development of a multi-gigawatt pipeline. This project goes across all different types of activity, wind, solar, and EV charging stations to the Caribbean states and Latin America, with a focus on the citizen nations, where approximately 800 megawatts of development capacity has been identified to be deployed. We're making this type of financing diversified across multiple clean technologies and multiple countries, which helps us deliver scale, flexibility, and cost efficiency out of the box. Our aim is to build awareness and momentum behind this and other initiatives which can deepen private sector involvement. The public sector, the MDIs, the DFIs, and the MDBs can all play a role by helping enable the flow of capital. That includes lowering barriers of entry for international developers and financial institutions. At the end of the day, it will take all of us, governments, companies, investors, and consumers, working together so we can benefit from a just transition to a sustainable economy. We have to do this while we afford access to everyone for clean, affordable energy, to maintain economic growth and development during this transition, and this project helps do that. Bank of America is committed to helping this effort, and we'll hope you will join us in a global effort to make this happen. Thank you, and this concludes our interlude.
Distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, I now open the joint fourth meeting of the COP26, fourth meeting of CMP 16, and fourth meeting of CMA 3rd. As we continue the national statements, I would like to remind distinguished heads of state and government of the actions in place to ensure effective time management. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Statements should be as concise as possible, noting that full text of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. And finally, please note that heads of state and government who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of their statements will be scheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. Allow me to also remind you of the COVID-19 protocols to ensure the health and safety of all participants. In accordance with the UNFCCC COP26 COVID-19 Code of Conduct, participants must wear face coverings except when eating, drinking, sitting in office spaces, meetings, sitting to perform negotiations, or are medically exempt. United Nations guidance and practice recommends face coverings to be surgical or FFP2. Delegates should wear face masks while seated, where social distancing is not possible. As part of the hygiene measures to ensure a safe environment of all participants, statements will be delivered from alternate rostrum. Dear distinguished heads of states and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, let us begin. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Umaro Sissoco Embalo, President of Guinea-Bissau. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muito obrigado. Senhor Primeiro-Ministro do Reino Unido, Boris Johnson, Senhora Nicola Sturgeon, Primeira-Ministra da Escócia, chefes de Estado e chefes de Governo, Senhora Lok Sharma, Presidente do COP26, Senhora Patrícia Espinosa, Secretária Executiva da Convenção das 4 Nações Unidas sobre Alterações Climáticas, Senhor Philip Bratt, Lord Provost da cidade de Glasgow, minhas senhoras, meus senhores. A recuperação econômica pós-Covid-19 deve ser socialmente justa, ambientalmente sustentável, resiliente e neutra em termos de clima para atingir as metas ambiciosas de Acordo de Paris e sobre o novo regime climático da Agenda 2030 das Nações Unidas. Desde Paris, na COP21, em 2015, muitas coisas já mudaram, exigindo mais responsabilidades e compromissos sérios de todos e para juntos enfrentarmos e adaptar resilientemente a essa realidade climáticas socioeconômicos de uma reforma sustentável. Os nossos desafios globais, a necessidade de aumentarmos as nossas ambições em termos de mitigação de gases com efeito de estufa e promover os dois dos outros pilares, nomeadamente e finanças de adaptação, se tornam ainda mais urgentes. E assim, os países desenvolvidos e as economias desenvolvidas devem liderar este processo, estabelecendo metas claras e ambiciosas para atingir emissões líquidas zero, ou seja, neutralidade carbônica até 2050. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, gostaria de aproveitar esta importante ocasião em que mais uma vez nos reunimos para repensar o futuro do nosso planeta e da nossa própria existência e para enaltecer que o meu país, Guiné-Bissau, um país altamente ameaçado pela subida de nível do mar, erosão costeira, entre os outros riscos ligados a alterações climáticas e com inúmeras vulnerabilidades extremas por ser um país africano, um país menos avançado e um pequeno estado insular em desenvolvimento, é que participa apenas de forma insignificante nas emissões globais de gases com efeito de estufa. E na sua contribuição nacional, determinada e atualizada, está bem patente o seu compromisso com uma meta quantificada de redução de emissões que cobre os principais setores, ou seja, agricultura, floresta, nos usos de solo, a fulo, energias e resíduos. E isso acresce uma outra meta ambiciosa, de reduções nas emissões de gases com efeito de estufa, ou seja, de menos de 30% até 2030, comparação com o cenário de referência. Ainda nesta senda de combate a alterações climáticas, de a figura importante se referir em um objetivo incondicional com recursos próprios do país, visando a redução das emissões em menos de 10% até 2030, face ao cenário de referência. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, a crise da pandemia de Covid-19 não deve inviabilizar agenda do financiamento do clima e para a África, o Fundo Verde, confiável para a adaptação, e assim como a promoção desses três pilares, a ambição de adaptações e finanças se torna ainda mais importante e é necessária uma resposta multilateral, mais gradual e em grande escala para enfrentar a crise climática. Tendo alinhamento
and actions nationally, subnationally, and collectively in future nationally determined contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Mesdames et messieurs les
Heads of State and Government, President of the COP26, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I'm delighted to see that this COP has been able to be held finally after a year of worry and delays. And the question of fighting climate change is its rightful place on the international agenda, a place that must be central because our future is at stake. I must also, however, admit that I do feel a little disappointed. We have the privilege of one of the longest-standing participants in this meeting, and therefore we have memory of many previous COPs. I do remember that events that we have, promises we've made, and hopes that we've shared. However, I'd like to state today that we are not yet there. We have not reached these promises and these hopes. We are not in line with the commitments made in 2015 in Paris for COP21. We are not up to the challenge of climate change. But fortunately, there is still time to act. There is still time to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which the IPCC has showed how this should be a limit. And for this, we need to finalise the rules for application of the Paris Agreement, particularly in the field of carbon markets and the clarity of states' commitments. It is important to develop another energy model that is the only way of guaranteeing our collective future. This is what the Principality of Monaco is making every effort to do through a policy that has already borne fruit. With 10% of our automobile fleet that is electric, a complete electrification of our waste management system by the end of this decade, as well as our transport networks by 2025, will happen with also focus on geothermic energy for heating as well as domestic heating. We're also going to work on making energy for building greener and developing solar energy too. Here, Monaco is playing its part in our common fight. At the same time, we've launched the Monaco Sustainable Financing Initiative. We invite the financial sector in the Principality to focus on investments that meet environmental criteria as well as social and good governance criteria. Monaco is also shouldering its responsibilities abroad. We have committed to increase our donations for the Climate Fund, and this is for 2030 with an amount of 1.3 million euros for 2025. There is also still time to announce, and I'm delighted to share this, there's still time to save our oceans, which are so crucial for the balance of our planet. For example, marine protected areas, so they continue to play their essential role in mitigating climate change. As the IPCC and the IPBOS has shown in their joint report, and as the most recent scientific workshop on the acidification of oceans underscored, which was held in Monaco, nature-based solutions will allow us to protect the climate and ecosystems while providing many benefits too for local communities. Solutions do exist, therefore. They can protect nature and provide progress. So we need to develop them today together in our countries and beyond, in all seas of the world. Thus, this is the only way that we'll be able to loyal to the commitments we made in Paris. And it is our duty regarding future generations. And if we're loyal to ourselves too, here in Glasgow, our future will be decided. It is a more sustainable and fairer future, a healthy planet. The place is Glasgow. The time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Highness. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Guillermo Lasso Mendoza, President of Ecuador. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President, Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, dear friends, the planet and its climatic system find themselves in crisis. We can see the effects all the way from the poles to the Amazon, with direct ramifications for food security, for the loss of income, disease, water, resources, the damage to infrastructure, forced displacement, but without a doubt, with its greatest impact on the poorest and the most vulnerable, as well as limiting the full enjoyment of all of human rights. Notwithstanding, every crisis also offers an opportunity. And to take those opportunities, we must have global action based on strong and renewed multilateralism and renewed international cooperation and solidarity. This isn't only ethically essential, it's also economically appropriate. This COP is perhaps the very last opportunity to step up, to demonstrate commitment and shared but differentiated responsibility of all states and the entire international community. We all have local problems which require global commitments. Chair, Ecuador is one of the 17 multi-diverse countries, mega-diverse countries of the planet, which possesses as a whole more than 2/3 of the world's biodiversity. And despite being responsible for around 0.18% only of global emissions, we have gone further, and in only 5 months of my government, we have become the first country in Latin America and the fourth in the world to adopt a cross-cutting public policy based on ecological transition towards a resilient circular economy, recycling its own resources. Ecuador has a clear goal of reducing 22.5% emissions up until 2025. Our ambitious climate policy rests on the building of the national transition plan towards decarbonisation of our economy for 2050, with investment projects in electric transport, renewable energy, agriculture, tourism, and sustainable habitats, as well as a circular economy. And this requires significant cooperation and international climate funding to support it, as well as the full participation by the private sector and all other actors across society. Nonetheless, all of these efforts will be for naught if at this COP we do not move forwards in progress to demonstrate our determination to bolster climate funding with a component to subsidise adaptation and confront the losses and damage deriving from climate change so far. Presidents, I've saved until last an historic announcement for our country and the world. This announcement relates to our Galapagos Islands and the waters that surround them, the jewel of our biodiversity, and a genuine living laboratory which, despite having an outstanding sustainable model, is confronting serious threats due to global warming, plastic waste, and other imbalances which are undermining our biodiversity, our food security, and our economic and social development. Given all of this, following a fluid dialogue process, which I've carried out since my first day in government, today it's my honour to inform you that we have reached a consensus between all of the involved sectors: fishing, tourism, conservation, and others, in order to establish a new marine reserve in the Galapagos Islands of 60,000 square kilometres, which will be added to the 130,000 which already exist in the reserve. This will not only strengthen the protection of the area's biodiversity, but it will also bolster our combat against climate change. This declaration, which is historic, is an innovative example leading the way for the world regards how we can best implement the Paris Accord in synergy with other commitments. In addition, and alongside contributing to fulfilling our promise to protect at least 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, as well as strengthening the new global framework on biodiversity, combating plastic pollution, the growth of biomass representing species both inside and outside the protected areas, and the growth in productivity for artisanal and industrial fishing. Presidents, what we achieve in this conference will dictate the future for humanity, and Ecuador recognizes, stemming from its constitution, the rights of nature. We invite all global parties to move from speech to action. Let us globally declare, internationally declare, nature's rights, enshrining those rights in each one of our constitutions. Let us take this unique opportunity to support planet-wide environmental transition, and let us walk together towards a genuine climate and environmental justice. Thank you very much, Presidents, and thank you to all of you for listening to our announcement.
Excellency, it is my great pleasure to welcome my President, His Excellency Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, President of Serbia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear Sara, at the very beginning, I feel obliged to thank Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Her Majesty's government for exceptional hospitality. I feel privileged to represent the Republic of Serbia at this important place and at the highest level World Forum in working on the most important topic of today, promoting climate awareness. We all agree that we must make investment into climate and environment. We all likewise agree that future generations must be educated in order not to repeat the mistakes we made by hurting the only planet that makes life possible. I'm very honored that the Republic of Serbia is co-chairing this year's conference as a non-EU representative of the Eastern Europe group. In concrete terms, we see a special contribution of our expert team in finalizing negotiations on implementation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which refers to establishment of global market and non-market mechanisms for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as to remaining provisions referring to advanced transparency framework and common timeframes for nationally determined contributions, which are the key provisions of the agreement that have not yet been covered by the decision that is to be adopted by the conference, i.e. all member states. We therefore believe that this is an exceptional opportunity for Serbia to give its full contribution to finalization of negotiations, which we hope will secure full implementation of the Paris Agreement. As a result of strong economic development modeled for Serbia by 2050, the impact of implementation of climate measures to employment will be optimal through new jobs creation and creation of new industries which have not existed so far. €1 billion was raised at the first green bonds auction in Serbia, which clearly confirms trust of international investors to our green agenda, but also to economic and political stability of our country. Incomes from green bonds issuance will be used for financing renewables, energy efficiency, sustainable water management, prevention of pollution, and circular economy development and biodiversity preservation. And as you can see, dear friends, my people made a terrific speech for me, but I'm going to add a few more words and a few more questions for those that are coming from big powers and that haven't answered yet on several questions. Number one is, how are we going to finance all these activities? We heard the story of $1 trillion that are at our disposal. My question would be, what would be the interest rate? What would be the terms for taking these amounts of money? And actually, how are we going to tackle that issue? Number two, how are we going to treat nuclear power plants? Are we going to shut them all, or we are going to build them more? Then, how are we going to build more renewables if we already started endorsing populist movements against wind parks, new hydropower plants, and are we going to put in jeopardy the level of our public debt to GDP ratio if we raise huge amounts of money? How are we going to treat natural gas, and how are we going to secure decent prices of natural gas, electricity power as well? And I came here using electric car from Edinburgh to Glasgow, but how are we going to do mining and refining of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and many other very important minerals? At the end, we all know what is our final aim, what is our final target, but it's not a fairy tale. We'll have to work a lot, we'll have to be 100% dedicated, and we'll have to be more honest to each other. Health of people living in Serbia depends directly on implementation of this agenda, just like health and life of each living being in Earth depends on arrangements that will be reached here and on national implementation of the respective arrangements. The great William Shakespeare wrote that the earth has music for those who listen. Perhaps it is the right time to listen and hear cry of the Mother Earth, because if we lose this race against time, our children will inherit irreparably polluted planet. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, dear President, once again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Serene Highness Hereditary Prince Aloy of Liechtenstein. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Dear Mrs. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by expressing my gratitude to the government of the United Kingdom for their huge efforts to welcome all of us in Glasgow and to assure the continuity of international climate diplomacy at times of global pandemic. the fact that so many of us are present at highest possible political level is a proof of the importance and urgency of the topic. Our meeting today is much more than just a conference about climate change. It is a conference about the future of our planet, the future of our states, and of mankind. It is our moral duty to ensure a livable planet and a healthy environment for future generations. Every state can and must contribute, and so does Liechtenstein. We recognize the urgent need to protect biodiversity and to take early action to reduce vulnerability to the massive effects of climate change. Liechtenstein therefore supports the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, some of us have argued that reducing greenhouse gas emissions while achieving economic and social well-being is incompatible. Liechtenstein can serve as an example to prove the opposite. Since 1990, our population has grown by more than 1/3, and our GDP has more than quadrupled. Nevertheless, Liechtenstein will achieve the Kyoto Target 2020 and reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to the level well below those of 1990. Greenhouse gas emissions per capita are among the lowest in Europe, despite the fact that Liechtenstein is one of the most industrialized countries in the world. It is therefore possible to decouple economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to make this happen, consistent investment in innovative technologies, to boost renewable energies, and to increase energy efficiency is essential. However, we need to go beyond those achievements. Liechtenstein is committed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and supports the developing countries in their effort to improve mitigation actions and adaptation to climate change. Supporting the Green Climate Fund is a key element of our financial engagement. And the government is committed to further increase climate finance for next year with a focus on the humanitarian sector. In that sense, I urge all states to increase our ambitions and follow through with implementation. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Highness. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Sadir Zaparov, President of Kyrgyzstan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Урматтуу мамлекет жана өкмөт башчылары, урматтуу Бириккен Улуттар Уюмунун башкы катчысы, урматтуу төрага. Сөзүмдүн башында учурдагы пандемиялык кыйын кырдаалда конференция өткөрүп жаткандыгы үчүн Улуу Британия менен Италия өкмөттөрүнө ыраазычылык билдиремин. Бүгүн бүткүл дүйнө жүзү сыяктуу эле Кыргызстан Глазго саммитинин чечимдерин күтүп жатабыз. Акыркы жылдары өлкөбүздүн табияты жана калкыбыз климаттын өзгөрүүсүнүн терс кесепеттерин кадимкидей сезе баштады. Ошондуктан Кыргызстан Париж келишиминин духун жана максаттарын актай тургандыгын билдирип кетемин. Аны ишке ашыруудагы татаал кыйынчылыктарга карабай, биз позитивдүү маанайдабыз.
We are nevertheless very optimistic, despite these difficulties.
Делегация башчылары.
Distinguished heads of delegation, by 2030, Kyrgyzstan aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 44%. Currently, our country's share in global emissions is negligible. It's around 0.03%. But these emissions are not industrial, but they're rather just related to day-to-day human activity. And so we're talking about the day-to-day life of our people. And this is what is at the heart of our work. We also need to say that here
гидроэнергетикалык тармакта анын ичинде мамлекеттик жеке өнөктөштүк принциптеринин негизинде өз ара.
Let's bear in mind innovative approaches which are linked inter alia to electricity, and we need to ensure excellent, optimal production of electricity and a good level of production of electricity. And this is at the foundation of many of our approaches. Adaptation programs and projects will focus on areas such as agriculture, health, water resources, industry, disaster risk mitigation, public health and biodiversity. Given that 94% of our territory is mountainous, this scope of this will cost nearly $3 billion. Distinguished participants of the summit, the problems I have set forth that are linked to the negative effects of climate change are common for many mountainous countries. In order to address this, their governments, including that of Kyrgyzstan, may need external assistance to solve them. In this regard, we propose to foresee and include in Glasgow outcome decisions targeted funding for developing mountainous countries in need of assistance. Specifically, we propose to create a special fund under the auspices of the UN to implement needs for tailored adaptation programs with a focus on the conservation of glaciers, forests, and biodiversity, as well as enhancing disaster risk preparedness, socioeconomic support for mountainous communities, and particularly support for women and children. The era of lengthy and pretty speeches is over. It is time to act in a purposeful, consistent and effective fashion. In conclusion, I would like to underscore that only through joint efforts we'll be able to solve our problems. Thank you for your attention.
President of Suriname. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leaders of the world, good morning. We have gathered again to demonstrate that collectively we can achieve and set out a path towards sustainable development. In doing so, we must be realistic, forward-looking, and balanced in our intentions. We must be realistic because by signing the Paris Agreement in 2015, almost the entire world agreed to keep the expected rise in temperature well below 2 centigrade and preferably below 1.5 centigrade. I cannot express my profound disappointment that neither the financial support nor the mitigation measures and the reduction of emissions promised in 2015 have been realized. Countries with low-lying coastal areas like Suriname and the small island developing states are amongst the most vulnerable countries, yet these countries receive no more than 2% of global climate finance between 2016 and 2018. The compassion demonstrated in 2015 seems to be lost, and these countries are in no way responsible for the devastating triggers of climate change, are facing mounting fiscal and debt problems caused by inter alia climate loss and damage. These countries are also facing the financial and social impact of the enduring COVID-19 pandemic. We have to look forward because the future is now. We have no choice than to act now in a cooperative and collective manner. Only by working together we'll be able to face the challenges of climate change. The people and the private sector have embraced the objectives of climate mitigation and adaptation policies. There is widespread support for the transition towards the green economy. Let us agree on the mechanisms that will support countries, especially the small island developing states and the country with low-lying coastal areas like Suriname in making this transition. We must be innovative in our thinking. Our dreams of carbon emission reduction will not just happen because we want it. We will need to continue investing in developing carbon reduction, end-user products, and more cost-effective carbon removal technologies. We must have also a balanced approach because we must recognize the different levels of development in a historical perspective. We see double standards creeping in our thinking, whereby those who have already benefited from carbon-driven economies would like to prevent emerging economies to lay similar foundation for the political stability, social development, and economic prosperity. We also must realize that all the good intentions will mean less or nothing if not underpinned by new concessional financing. Existing financial instruments must be reviewed regarding their efficiency and effectiveness. Suriname is a carbon-negative nation during difficult times, and many temptations so far has managed to retain 93% of its forest cover, its wide range of ecosystems, and its rich biodiversity. And we remain committed to maintain this commitment, as we have demonstrated by endorsing the Glasgow Declaration on Forests and Land Use. We see our commitment as a moral, developmental, and environmental investment for which appropriate compensation means and mechanisms need to be created to support sustainable transition in a green economy based on renewable energy sources. Our ambitious NDCs identify 4 sectors that generate 70% of Suriname's emissions, while at the same time they generate most income for the people of our country. Madam Chair, Suriname, being one of the few carbon-negative countries in the world, has taken bold steps to identify mitigation and adaptation measures to build resilience to counteract this effect of climate change and to reduce emissions while continuing to conserve our biodiversity and strengthening sustainable forest management. We hope that the world recognizes our efforts and support us while we create a new architecture of green development where nature and modern development exist in harmony. Suriname remains committed to the Paris Agreement and with its limited means will continue to protect and preserve and maintain our forests and biodiversity in a positive and balanced manner. Madam Chair, we expect the same commitment for all those gathered here today and those who are not here. Our decisions and commitments must be global, forceful, trustworthy, but above all, realistic and supported by political will and financial means. Leaders, our youth is waiting to see what we decide to create, a secure and sustainable future, and what we leave them behind to build on. No doubt, an enormous task, but we owe it to this and next generations, and with collective will, we can save the world. Let we express leadership, let we take responsibility, and let we make the difference to save our planet. I thank you for your kind attention. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of Tanzania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, President of COP26, it is with great pleasure and honor I take this podium to address the scourge of our time, the climate change. We in Tanzania have not been spared by these events. Sea level rise is eating at arable land. Our pride, the Mount Kilimanjaro, is drastically becoming bald due to glacier melting. And we are experiencing unpredictable floods and droughts. We are experiencing all these despite our resolve to dedicate 48 million hectares to forest conservation as global service to carbon sequestration. Our exotic and beautiful archipelago of Zanzibar is struggling with temperature rises, saltwater intrusion, and inundation, thus impacting its tourism ecology. Excellencies, what does all this mean to a poor country like Tanzania? It means 30% of our GDP that comes from agriculture, forestry, and fisheries is not sustainable. Sadly, the big resolve and robust steps to combat causes and effects of climate change are still low-paced. The Paris goal of achieving 1.5 degrees Celsius is yet to be made, while more commitment are required. We in Tanzania are determined to take swift actions, as our inaction means risking our development agenda and prosperity. We have in place the National Climate Change Response Strategy and the National Determined Contributions aimed at reducing greenhouse gases emission economy-wide between 30 and 35 by 2030. On mitigation front, through hydro, geothermal, and solar, we have managed to increase power generation and thus increasing the access rate from 43% in 2017 to almost 70% in 2020. Our reforestation rate increased from 25 to 27 in 2020. with every year planting on average of 276 million trees. Excellencies, if we developing countries have shown such leadership, why large emitting countries lagging behind? The IPCC AR6 has clearly explained the scope and magnitude of the climate change impacts. We know what is required, and we know that if the world will not act accordingly, the countries like ours with low adaptive capacity have no options but to brace for more devastating impacts. However, what we all ought to remember is when the drastic climate changes hit, it will choose no location, might or weak, poor or rich country. And so we call upon an urgent unlocking of a climate financing that will trigger planned targets and implementation of the NDC. The time to act is now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Zuzana Čaputova, President of Slovakia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, COP has met several times since we agreed in Paris to reach net zero by mid-century. Yet the science is very clear. We are nowhere near this goal. Glasgow is make or break for the planet. We must double down on our efforts to cut emissions and mitigate the impact of the climate crisis. If we fail, the only thing to discuss at the future COPs will be the irreversible devastation of our planet and its habitats. This scenario is just about avoidable, but so far we seem to be failing to prevent it. The young generation understand this. In my own country, Slovakia, 42% of young people are very worried about the climate crisis. 73% think humanity has failed to look after our planet. 2/3 find politicians' actions to address the climate crisis disappointing. A recent study carried out in a number of other countries has shown that 40% of young people consider not having children because of the climate crisis. It's clear. The next generation knows we are running out of time. And we as political leaders have run out of excuses. I am glad that as the European Union, we are doing what's needed, reducing our emissions by at least 55% by 2030, becoming the first climate-neutral continent by 2050, and helping developing countries do the same. Slovakia's own emissions are down by 46% compared to 1990 levels, with methane reduced by more than half. Our electricity mix is already 80% low on carbon, and from 2023 we will not use coal to produce electricity. 43% of our post-pandemic recovery funds will support sustainable green transition in transport, industry or buildings, while not leaving the most vulnerable behind. We know that this alone will not prevent the worst-case scenarios. It takes truly global action, not just by the EU and the rest of the developed world, although we do shoulder a special responsibility. We must all do our fair share, including those states whose top representatives are not in Glasgow. This also applies to climate finance. In 2019-2023, Slovakia is doubling our voluntary contribution to the Green Climate Fund. Excellencies, the carbon footprint of the planes we arrived on cannot be the only output from this year's COP. We must turn the Paris commitments into credible delivery and real CO2 reductions. We have different starting points and paths for the development, but we do have one shared goal: preserving our planet. Let's act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Klaus Werner Ioannis, President of Romania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is no denial that climate change is a tremendous challenge and that we need to show ambition in addressing it. From 1989 to 2019, Romania's greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 64%. We have one of the lowest rates of emissions per capita in the European Union. Between 1990 and 2019, Romania has also reduced its CO2 emission intensity per unit of GDP by 77%, a percentage more than double the global average. But we are committed to do more. Further reducing emissions will be challenging, especially as we move closer to net zero. I want us to work together to develop, manufacture, and deploy new green technologies. Innovation is key. Among other Glasgow initiatives, Romania joins the US-driven Agriculture Innovative Mission for Climate. We also need to make sure that nobody is left behind in the process of green transition. Jobs are created and social inequalities reduced. Romania fully supports the European Union's leading efforts on climate change and is committed to contribute to the EU overall 55% emission reduction by 2030. We have already achieved this reduction rate nationally, and we are committed to keep cutting. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no silver bullet against climate change. A set of interconnected measures can help us deliver. We will harness the very force of nature. Romania has a solid share of renewable energy in its energy mix, with 40% of our electricity coming from renewable sources. We are committed to expand this share. We will fight climate change with nature-based solutions using 57,000 hectares of new forests in our recovery plan to capture carbon and combat desertification. We also need to channel the force of people in addressing climate change. Education is key to environmentally friendly behavior. We must advance education and research on climate change. Starting in 2023, Romania will host an innovative World Meteorological Organization Center that will help agricultural systems in Europe to better respond to climate change. The impact of climate change has no national borders. Let's join our forces in protecting the environment, making sure we leave future generations a greener and a safer planet. There is no time to lose. The time for action is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, President of Guyana. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen,
The fate of civilization resides in the decisions we make here in Glasgow. The climate issue and crisis has given us an ultimatum. Either we take immediate and drastic action or subject ourselves to an infernal global disaster. Indifference and inaction will be costly. Already, we are far behind in limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The coming decade, therefore, must be the decade of decisive action. Climate change affects us all, rich, poor, developed, and developing states. But its effects are more severe on the poorest and most vulnerable, especially small island developing states and low-lying coastal states. For us, it is a question of survival. We can use this summit to change the present trajectory. Immediate action is needed on three fronts. First, we must set more ambitious goals to reduce emissions, and we must honor to the letter those ambitions. All countries have an obligation to act, but the world's foremost polluters have a greater duty to institute steeper emissions cut. Second, the pledge of US $100 billion per annum, made 1 decade ago, to support climate action must be met. Dishonored pledges are a recipe for disaster. Third, forests constitute a powerful arsenal in the fight against climate change. Forest-rich countries must be provided with the incentives necessary to keep their forests intact and to reduce deforestation and forest degradation. Mindful that deforestation contributes 16% to annual global emissions, and in recognition of the ecosystem and climate services provided by forests, it is imperative that we finalize the rules for carbon markets and REDD+, so as to properly value tropical forests and the climate services which they provide. My country, Guyana, is already playing its part in addressing climate change and will continue to do so. We'll maintain our forests, almost the size of England and Scotland combined, storing 20 gigatons of carbon as a global asset. We'll work with local communities in conserving, protecting, and sustainably managing our forests, biodiversity, and freshwater supplies. We'll decouple economic growth and emissions through a progressively cleaner energy mix with the aim of reducing our carbon emissions by 70% by 2030. We'll invest in low-carbon opportunities for jobs, ecosystem services, social inclusion through an expanded low-carbon development strategy. We are at a historic moment in our civilization. History must not judge us as having only counted our losses. It must instead herald our effort to confront one of our planet's greatest threats, climate change. In this regard, Guyana is prepared to work with the international community for collective action. We support the position of CARICOM and are aligned with the Alliance for Small Island States, AOSIS, the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States, CELAC, the Letitia Pact, the Dhaka-Glasgow Declaration, and the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forests and Land Use, among others. Though we recently became an oil producer, we support the removal of subsidies from fossil fuel production and advocate a strong global carbon price. Let future generations say, when it mattered the most, we made a difference. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gitanas Nausėda, President of Lithuania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Lithuania is committed to be a part of the global solution. As nature is declining at unprecedented rate, it is time for us to come together as a humankind. Big and small, north and south, rich and poor, we must all change our ways and stop the climate crisis that leads to biodiversity loss and threats to public health. Lithuania knows that crises come with opportunities. We know the power of change. We know very well power of change. 10 years ago, we transformed our heating sector by switching from natural gas to sustainable indigenous biomass. We kept more money in the people's pockets, and we also reduced pollution emissions while staying competitive. Today, Lithuania strongly supports international and European Union climate change goals. We have already reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 58%. Our plan, endorsed by the Parliament, is to go further, to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels, and to cover at least 50% of our electricity needs from renewables. The whole Lithuanian economy will be climate neutral by 2050. As fossil fuel prices are reaching new highs, I see new opportunities. The Paris Agreement, together with the digitization drive, form a clear roadmap to achieve ambitious goals. New partnerships must be forged, both locally and internationally. That is why I called on Lithuanian municipalities, businesses, industries, NGOs, and every Lithuanian to join the Green Lithuania Declaration. My country also encourages closer regional cooperation and joint Baltic states' actions to tackle climate change and the deterioration of the Baltic Sea, and to better preserve the nature. As a global community, we should rethink the ways we produce and consume. For the industry production to leave no CO2 footprint, it needs to move closer to consumer markets. We should also pay more attention to compliance with the highest environmental and nuclear standards. Our technological shift should be sustainable and environmentally friendly. Fellow leaders, we all hold keys to the better future. Let us use them for global welfare. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Haji Jainjob, President of Namibia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates. Climate change and the worsening ecological crisis obey no sovereign boundaries. COP26 is the international community's last chance to collectively overcome the disconnect between a divided international system and a global calamity that threatens us all. Namibia is taking transformative steps towards honoring this responsibility. Along with the world, Namibia is experiencing widespread and devastating impacts on key facets of our civilization, including severe droughts to devastating field fires, destroying large tracts of our agricultural land adversely, impacting livelihoods, human health, and well-being. For COP negotiations, there are critical objectives that are crucial to protect us all from the impacts of runaway climate change, breakdown of the biosphere, and the death of the world oceans. It is hard to overstate the urgency and consequences of getting this right. Namibia is committed to the following objectives for COP26. 1, we aim for a conclusion and adoption of the robust Article 6 at COP26. This critical step would provide the bedrock of an international carbon market mechanism necessary to drive funds to the places where emissions can be cut most effectively, to mobilize large-scale private investment for climate action, and to drive crucial innovation. Article 6 cannot wait for another COP. 2, Namibia supports the United Nations Secretary General's push to, quote-unquote, consign coal to history. Namibia will support the phasing out of coal in our region by significantly scaling up solar and wind energy to support domestic demand, whilst working with our neighbors to responsibly phase out existing coal generation in Southern African power pool, and transform our region's energy map. This is the single most important step to keeping Paris Agreement to 1.5 degrees. In our support for scaling up climate finance, we call for 100 million target for climate finance needs to be surpassed at the target, with a clear roadmap on how the commitment amounts will be delivered. We ask for an increased volume of grants rather than loans to make it possible for emerging economies carrying the high debt burdens to kickstart transformative projects. Namibia has amplified its 2015 pledge in a national determined contributions. We now aspire to reduce our emissions by 91% before the end of this decade. These ambitions are matched by the highest level of political commitment. The green and blue economy, including green hydrogen industry, are cornerstones of our Harambee Prosperity Plan, launched March this year. Green economy initiatives such as our Southern Corridor Development Initiative will drive more sustainable post-COVID recovery. Tomorrow, we will announce how Namibia is unlocking our 5,700 square kilometers in our Karas region for the potential development of green hydrogen and ammonia assets, expected to double the region's employment and triple the installed renewable energy generation capacity for the entire country. We are taking these bold steps to enhance our energy security, carbonize our country, assist our regional and global peers to reduce their emissions and build a more resilient economy. The impacts of climate change continue to accelerate and deepen. In this context, we call on other countries to show the highest level of ambition and commitments possible. In closing, Namibia urges all COP negotiators to facilitate the Paris rulebook, take meaningful action in areas of consigning coal to history, lay the foundations of international carbon markets, and honor and exceed financial commitment made. I grew up praying for the serenity to accept the things I could not change, so to courage to change the things in my control, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. Climate change is something we can all change. Let's muster courage and do that. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Egilis Levits, President of Latvia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, let me begin by thanking the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Boris Johnson for leadership as our host and co-president of COP26. It has been 6 years since we all took up commitments in Paris. We know that collectively we are not on track to meet them. There is no time to lose. Keeping the 1.5 degrees target within reach is a must. It is a minimum that COP26 should deliver. My country, Latvia, is no exception in experiencing the increasing effects of climate change. Within almost 500 kilometers of coastline, we are keenly aware of coastal erosion risks. Extreme climate-related incidents in Europe are becoming more common. Latvia contributes only 0.02% of world greenhouse gas emissions. Yet we will uphold our commitments in this field at the national level, within the European Union, and in the UN framework. Mitigation efforts are urgently needed. This is a common task of national governments, international organizations, public and private sectors, our societies. Each individual is a crucial stakeholder. We must persuade our national constituencies that going green can bring greater prosperity and security. A new mindset is required. Changes in our behavior and a transition to a green economy are in long-term interests of humankind. All too often, support for climate-friendly policies is in words only. To a certain extent, I observe this in my country too. We like to believe we are naturally green-minded. True, a high percentage of Latvia's energy mix comes from renewables. More than half of our land is covered by forest. Our greenhouse gas emissions per capita have decreased by more than a third since 1990. Yet, I often meet resistance to proactive steps that would decrease our reliance on fossil fuels. There is still much to be done, especially in the fields of energy, transport, and agriculture. While we work towards limiting climate change, adaptation is also essential. Necessary changes may create social challenges. Certain individuals, groups, and nations will be in the short and medium term suffer losses. The concerns of those who mistrust and refuse to accept the climate agenda must be answered. In order to promote reform, it is necessary to create mechanisms which would at least partially offset their losses. Crucially, such mechanisms need to be backed by adequate resources. Greater interaction between science and businesses is also urgently needed. Scaling up of investments in green technologies is key to sustainable growth. A robust framework of rules to ensure environmental integrity of the system and promote ambition must be an outcome of this COP26. This includes rules on transparency as well on markets. We must also be able to move beyond pledges and tackle the fine print now. How will the transition work in practice? Who is going to pay for it? Who is going to carry the heaviest burden? Mr. President, as you have rightly said, we have no choice but to deliver. The call to action is loud and clear, especially from our youth. For them, climate change is an existential threat. They are right to demand our leadership. I, as President of Latvia, will do my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Nikos Anastasiades, President of Cyprus. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, allow me at the outset to convey my deep appreciation and sincere congratulations to the United Kingdom for hosting COP26, as well as the Secretariat of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change for organizing this extremely important and timely conference for challenges associated with climate change. Challenges that are global and can only be mitigated if we all act together with a sense of urgency and joint commitment towards enhancing collective action and accelerating global transformation to a low carbon and climate resilient society. Our target towards this goal was clearly identified 6 years ago at COP21 in Paris, when we collectively pledged to cut greenhouse emissions as to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared with the pre-industrial times. However, currently, and we have to be honest so as to strengthen our efforts in fulfilling our promises, there is no sign that we are growing back greener, since not only planetary warming is accelerating, but we are witnessing around the globe protracted heat waves, devastating fires and deforestation, increased water scarcity, droughts, floods, and extreme weather patterns. That is why I have no doubt that COP26 can and should prove to be the historic milestone in the efforts to address the said devastating impacts by ensuring the highest possible commitment from all participating or from all countries in a way that is fair, efficient and transparent, whilst maintaining solidarity towards vulnerable countries that will be severely affected. For these exact reasons, Cyprus fully endorses and supports the initiatives and declarations of COP26, namely the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use, the Global Goal to Clean Power Transition Statement, the Declaration on Accelerating Transition to 100% Zero Emissions Cars and Vans, as well as the US initiative, the Global Methane Pledge Initiative, and the Greening Government Initiative. Further, in addition to our commitment to adhering to the targets of the said declarations and initiatives, Cyprus also remains fully committed to take all necessary measures to achieve the Paris Agreement and the EU targets, with the aim of achieving a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. To this end, and as a first step in accomplishing these ambitious but highly needed goals, my country will allocate more than €500 million up to 2026, adopting new policies and measures as regards using cleaner fuels such as natural gas and renewable energy sources, and promoting necessary investments in the relevant areas of transport, agriculture, industry, land use, and forestry and waste management. Distinguished friends, as a small country, we do acknowledge that our national contribution towards tackling the impact of climate change is indeed limited. We therefore seek to enhance regional cooperation through coordinated synergies and sharing best practices, taking into account that the Mediterranean and Middle East is classified as a global climate change hotspot. Within this framework, we have undertaken the initiative of developing a regional action plan with the involvement of more than 240 scientists from our wide region, as well as various international organizations who are already preparing policy recommendations, measures, and specific solutions. With the finalization of the scientific part of the action plan, which will establish the foundations of our future steps, within the coming months we will hold a ministerial meeting and later a leader summit that will initiate appropriate coordination and monitoring mechanism for the implementation of our commitments. Distinguished friends, we are compelled, and people expect from us, to take on urgent action to address the climate change, and I'm certain that you will agree with me that the time to act is upon us. Our vision should be none other than to look to the future with optimism and to use the climate challenge as an opportunity to proudly demonstrate what all countries, what humanity can achieve when joined forces. I have no doubt that by decisively cooperating and acting together with unity and greater urgency, we will be able to overcome the dire consequences of a warming planet and bring forward the necessary changes for a sustainable future, so as for our generation and the coming ones to enjoy better health and living conditions, improved air quality, and the green environment. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Alberto Fernandez, President of Argentina. Your Excellency, please, you have the floor.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Thank you very much. The health crisis caused by the pandemic reminds us that we must now overcome a much greater crisis of sustainability and imbalance, which affects the environment, society, and the economy. This is a triple crisis which is broadening existing gaps between countries and people. The impact on our shared resources and commodities has exceeded all previous limits and has highlighted serious problems which need to be dealt with. In this context, countries such as Argentina constitute through their ecosystem a life support system for the entire planet, which must contribute to global food security. Specific contributions that we must commit to should be undertaken in the context of the principle of shared but differentiated responsibilities. These contributions must be accompanied with implementation means which allow us to ensure a clean transition and one that is resilient regarding the impacts of climate change. Argentina reiterates its commitment to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement and has shouldered the responsibility of combating climate change as a state policy. We are nationally committed and have committed to a 27% reduction vis-à-vis 2016 in emissions. We will have a second adaptation communication with goals which are necessary to attain this agenda. This commitment will support investments and developments, and this enshrined in national production chains in order to ensure an inclusive, stable, sovereign and sustainable energy transition in its entirety. We must ensure that we explore hydroelectric generation as a new area. We have a new parliamentary law on EVs and electricity transportation, laws to illegalize deforestation and implement this, and the Parliament is also passing a new bill for minimum budgets for environmental subsidies for native forests. In the cultural sphere, we are promoting the federal law on environmental education. These are tangible and concrete commitments. As has been shown on a number of occasions, to progress with the transformation agenda, it's important to establish payment mechanisms for sustainable systems to pay down climate debt and install the concept of environmental debt universally. It's vital to apply the principle of differentiated rights internationally based on environmental solidarity, including middle and high-income countries and including the displacement of debt, delay of debt payments, and the strengthening of environmental commitments, fostering the capitalization of regional development banks. We call on all to comply with the commitments made and guarantee access to billions of dollars earmarked for fostering climate action. Argentina does not have any intention to see this COP end just in hot air. For this reason, we call on the technical committee to ensure that it has equitable representation from developing and developed countries to work on a roadmap regarding how we can properly mobilize the necessary means to recognize the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, taking into account indebtedness and structural inequalities, as well as the vital need to have social well-being. It's the time to act. Let us do it together. Thank you.
Your Excellency. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Mr. Julius Maada Bio, President of Sierra Leone. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me from the outset thank Italy and the United Kingdom for convening this global community and mobilizing concerted and collective global efforts to discuss and act on the single universal existential threat of our time, climate change. Sierra Leone has the most diverse ecosystem in the world. Inland wetlands and forests across 4 main relief regions, about 15,000 plant species, the most diverse fish stock along the west coast of Africa, and 761 species of animals, of mammals and birds. But we are highly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. Rapid biodiversity, tree cover loss, and the attendant threats to human habitat, health, food, and water security. As a consequence, other fallouts like poverty, gender disparities, and youth unemployment are intensifying, especially in the COVID-19 era. We are doing the very best we can under the circumstances. We are fully committed to all international agreements and actions to develop a climate-resilient future. We have established a stand-alone Ministry of the Environment and recently reviewed and updated our nationally determined contribution, National Climate Change Policy, and National Climate Change Strategy and Action Plans. We have identified environmental pressure points, and we are implementing coherent mitigation and adaptation strategies. Within our limited resources, we have underscored climate change action in national development planning and budgeting processes in alignment with outcomes derived from the UNFCCC process. We have enhanced the conversation. We have enhanced the conservation and protection of natural habitats and ecosystems, improved meteorological services, integrated water resource management and community-based adaptation strategies in the agriculture sector, and promoted climate change risk management. We are promoting alternative renewable energy in off-grid solar networks and stepping up tree planting to restore 960,000 hectares of depleted forest. We believe that establishing a green economy should focus on restoring and protecting, investing in and consuming sustainably, and being accountable and inclusive. As Prime Minister Boris Johnson recently stated, it is indeed right and lucrative to be green. And we want to work collectively towards that goal. But good climate policies and ambitions alone, such as ours in Sierra Leone, may however fall short. Additionally, due to high debt servicing, Sierra Leone lacks the fiscal space to scale up investment in climate change actions. We therefore agree with Kermit the Frog that being African and being one of the least developed countries, it is not easy being green. We need technical support to introduce or implement enabling regulatory and structural reforms. My government is eager to work with partners to further ease the investment climate, co-create projects, and map out incentives for potential green and ESG investments. We urgently need investment in digital infrastructure and technology if we are to acquire better GIS data, improve marine conservation and management, promote nature-based solutions, and just rural transitions to sustainable agriculture, introduce climate-smart agriculture and food systems that preserve our forests and provide high yields, and improve seeds for farmers. We stand ready to invest in green energy sources with smaller environmental footprints. We have introduced some off-grid solar electrification to some towns, but we need to expand those investment to other towns and make them even more affordable. cheaper and affordable solar systems will expand energy access to more Sierra Leoneans around the country. We should also invest in affordable, competitively priced, low-carbon energy sources for cooking and other domestic uses in order to avoid the indiscriminate felling of trees or for firewood and charcoal. We need to invest in green urban planning, sustainable urban waste management, green mass transit transportation systems, and stricter emissions testing and enforcement to reduce emission footprints. We need the technical and vocational training to support the growth of jobs created as a consequence of these investments. But more importantly, we believe sustained investment in equitable education will prepare young people and women, especially, to respond to climate challenges, help consolidate the gains we will make from foregoing investments, and build a more inclusive and resilient future. We need support from global climate financing streams. Africa has access to less than 5% of global climate financing. We also need the support of larger economies and the international financial community to de-risk private capital and green investments. At this conference and beyond, Sierra Leone is determined to engage and explore all possibilities, ideas, and partnerships to achieve our collective global goal. It may not be easy being green, but we in Sierra Leone are determined to be green. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Mette Frederiksen, President of Denmark. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have two paths in front of us. The first one leads to a future destroyed by climate change. Extreme weather events, rising sea levels, wildfires, and heat waves. That is where we are headed right now. The other path leads to a green, sustainable future, clean energy, clean air, green jobs, and better lives. It is not a real choice. The green future is the only way forward, and we all need to ramp up ambitions. Denmark have decided to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% in 2030. Our experience shows that green transition can go hand in hand with sustainable growth, jobs, and welfare. Of course, all countries need a fair chance, and all countries need to take responsibility. The richest countries have to deliver on climate finance. Therefore, Denmark aims to mobilize at least 1% of the promised $100 billion by 2023. And 60% of Denmark's climate aid will help the most vulnerable nations adapt to climate change. Now I will speak on behalf of the Faroe Islands and Greenland. As a self-governing country in the Kingdom of Denmark, Faroe Islands have their own climate policy. The government is now preparing their climate contribution according to the Paris Agreement. This includes ambitious carbon reduction goals set by the National Parliament early next year. The green transition of the Faroe Islands includes a conversion to 100% renewable electric production by 2030. Greenland is a self-governing Arctic country of the Kingdom of Denmark. In Greenland, as you all know, dramatic climate changes are already visible. This affects the livelihood and biodiversity in Greenland. Greenland has taken an important step to halt all new oil and gas exploration licenses. In a few years, 90% of electricity produced in Greenland will be sustainable. the Prime Minister of Greenland has informed me on the government's decision to enter the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to choose our future, a brighter, greener future for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ivan Duque, President of Colombia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muy buenos días.
A very good morning, Presidents, Excellencies. I want to begin my statement with a question. What is the world expecting of us at this summit? The climate crisis we are confronting is the greatest challenge of our times. And this climate crisis has led to more natural disasters, more floods, an increase in the sea levels, coastal erosion, glacial destruction, the loss of snowfields, and an increase in temperatures, which are in turn triggering transmissible diseases, contagious diseases. And in that context, we must act. We must act right now. And the world expects no less than for us to very clearly establish that we are not going to backslide, but our effort must mean that for 2030 as a minimum, we have a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And also, to be clear, the world is expecting nothing less of us than that we reaffirm the goal of the 1.5 degrees centigrade. This is non-negotiable. On that point, it's essential to refer to the fact that right now we can't have disputes between countries. We can brook no expressions of mistrust between us because, quite simply, there is no planet B. It is for this reason that Colombia has come to this meeting with a clear-cut message. Colombia represents 0.6% of greenhouse gas emissions. But Colombia is one of the 20 countries which is the most threatened by the climate crisis. And it's for that same reason that we as a nation have shouldered a major challenge, and that is to act with conviction and clarity. We came today to this summit in order to express our belief that and engagement that Colombia will reduce by 50% its greenhouse gas emission by 2030 and that it will reach carbon zero by 2050. And I can say with pride that we have signed up to the commitment to have 30% of our territory designated as protected areas by 2030. But we are not going to wait for 2030. In 2022, we will have 30% of our territory declared as a protected area. And we are doing this because we have also shouldered a key challenge. We have multiplied 100-fold our ability to generate environmentally friendly energy. We have planted 100 million trees, which will be completed in December this year to complete the goal that we set for ourselves for August 2022. We've also shouldered the challenge to pass a new law which clearly penalizes environmental crimes. And we're also promoting natural conservation agreements and linking them to the agreements we have with other countries to create the largest protected marine area in the world. Colombia has shouldered its challenges as a state, and countries such as Colombia, which only represent 0.6% of greenhouse gas emissions, are taking up that challenge because those countries that have contributed the most to the climate crisis have not owned the responsibility. This is a responsibility we must all shoulder. This is our greatest moral challenge as well as our greatest existential challenge. And we cannot leave this COP without giving the world a clear answer. And that is the answer that this summit must go down in history as the turning point where the world said, enough, enough of hot air. Let us join hands to clearly express the way we are going to confront the climate crisis and return hope to future generations who are demanding the best of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. João Manuel Lourenço, President of Angola. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excelências, senhores.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, it is a very great honour to address this 26th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Angolan Republic believes that climate change is one of the greatest challenges facing humanity, and that is due to a set of direct and indirect effects that cause to the economic and social life of nations great damage, a fact that constitutes a real challenge for development. We embrace the cause of mangrove restoration and protection through a national campaign to replant mangrove seedlings across the extensive national coastline. We support the production and consumption of clean energy derived from existing hydroelectric dams and others to be built, as well as from other sources of renewable energy, with emphasis on photovoltaic energy production projects with solar parks accompanying that, which will lead to a reduction in the consumption of fossil fuels for the production of electricity. Currently, our national energy matrix already incorporates 62% of non-polluting energy sources, and we are aiming to reach the 70% line by 2025. We have just signed in Washington, D.C. an agreement with the International Conservation Fund, the IWCF. This is an agreement to ensure the conservation of the Leone, Guyana and Mavinga national parks, bolstering the protection of flora and fauna and the development of sustainable international tourism. We have also improved a national strategy for climate change, 2021 to 2035, which aims to attain the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. Angola recently promulgated an environmental legislative package which will incorporate instruments which will be decisive in combating climate change. Angola has signed up to international agreements on sustainable development, including Africa 2063. This is in line as well with the Sustainable Development Goals. Your Excellencies, Angola has defined its nationally determined contribution, which allows us to reduce our carbon dependency for electricity production with a 2025 horizon, and we have taken additional measures in the area of the sustainable management of forests, transport and agriculture. We have taken adaptation measures to improve climate resilience among our communities and to protect our social and economic investments. We reiterate our firm commitment and determination to remain committed to climate change and to adopt a low-carbon development model. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Nana Akufo-Addo, President of Ghana. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, Your Excellencies, climate change is the greatest threat to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. It has enormous impact on the fundamentals required for our survival on Earth, and that is why we have converged in Glasgow. Even though we in Africa are the least of the contributors to this phenomenon, responsible for less than 4% of the global volume of carbon emissions, we suffer the most because our agrarian and resource-driven economies are peculiarly susceptible to the effects of climate change, and our capacity to withhold its shocks is weak. Agriculture, water, energy, and the extraction of mineral resources are essential drivers of developments in our countries, but at the same time are characteristically sensitive to changing climate. The African Development Bank has stated that the continent will need some $3 trillion United States dollars in mitigation and adaptation by 2030 to enable us implement our nationally determined contributions. The obvious question arises as how do we in Africa finance these commitments, especially as our socio-economic development continues, unfortunately, to be low. The Almighty has blessed our lands with abundant natural resources, and it would be wholly unfair for the world to demand that Africa abandons the exploitation of these same resources needed to finance our development and help us to cope better with the threat of climate change at a time when many countries on the continent have only just discovered them. The development and industrialization of the wealthy nations of today were also hinged on the exploitation of their natural resources. This development came at the expense of pollution and the emission of greenhouse gases. Even today, the Western world is responsible for 76% of carbon emissions. Ghana acknowledges the importance and effects of climate change and the urgent need to combat it, and we acknowledge equally the importance of protecting our development. We believe that a balance must be struck and maintained between our social, economic, and environmental imperatives. We're naturally very disappointed by the failure of the wealthy nations to honor their commitments of making available $100 billion annually to the poorer countries to assist us in the fight against climate change, and by the unavailability of the technology transfer that will help us find sustainable ways of charting a path out of this existential crisis. Those same nations are, however, insisting that we abandon the opportunity for rapid development of our economies. That would be tantamount to enshrining in the global community inequality of the highest order, a totally unacceptable conclusion. We must find a solution that is equitable and fair, a solution that levels the playing field, a solution that recognizes the historical imbalances between the high emitters and low emitters. Ghana therefore supports the call for debt for climate swaps, which will address a multitude of issues in one fell swoop. Let us use this summit as a turning point to create a more prosperous, greener, and fairer world, which maintains the balance between the social, economic, and environmental requirements of all nations of the earth, rich and poor. Success in this endeavor is the greatest inheritance we can leave for current and future generations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Andry Rajoelina, the President of Madagascar. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Excellencies, heads of state, President of COP26, distinguished guests. Decision makers from around the world are here today meeting in Glasgow to work to preserve humanity's future. Global warming spares no nation. A series of fires, droughts and floods have struck several countries in Europe, in North America, South Asia and in Africa. And as a consequence, and particular, these consequences are disastrous, particularly for the south of Madagascar, which is facing a famine caused by climate change. More than 1.3 million Malagasy are in a situation of food distress. Indeed, a lack of rain for consecutive years has made any subsistence activity impossible. My compatriots are bearing the brunt of a climate crisis not of their own making. To fight this injustice, Madagascar is focusing on developing structural projects to provide a radical and lasting change, particularly through the construction of a large water pipeline to supply the land and people in the south of my country. Dear leaders, brothers and sisters, our forests are the lungs of our planet, and today this global forest heritage is endangered. More specifically in Africa and in Madagascar, where we are experiencing rapid deforestation. Forests are as if they're on shifting sands. Destroyed by mankind, they are disappearing quickly and becoming deserts. Every year, 3.9 million hectares of forest disappear in Africa. The main drivers of this deforestation is the use and processing of wood into charcoal. 90% of African households still use charcoal to cook their food. To obtain 10 kilos of charcoal, you need 100 kilos of wood. So you can imagine, thus, every year, one family destroys 1 hectare of forests to meet their own needs. So how can we stop this disaster? Madagascar is advocating for energy transition in Africa through financing alternative solutions, which would replace charcoal, to make more widespread the use of stoves that run on bioethanol and biogas to preserve our forests. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced that Madagascar, like Africa, can showcase green development and environmental development. We need to act now, and it is here in Glasgow that we need to do so. A single word, a single gesture, words followed by action will change things. Thus, I call on leaders from around the world to accelerate the mobilization of $100 billion for the Paris Agreement so that we can fund an energy transition policy in Africa. We need to act today, not tomorrow, nor should we wait till 2030. Failure is not an option. We must succeed for us, for our nation, and for our planet. The Earth, which has given us everything, is asking us today that we save her. Let's save our planet. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Zenko Komstrit, the Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Poštovani predsjednici, premijeri, članovi delegacija, predstavnici nevladinog sektora, dame i gospodo. Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo što sam danas ovdje i što imam priliku pozdraviti sve vas na ovako značajnoj konferenciji posvećenoj klimatskim promjenama.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to greet you all at this important conference on climate change. This conference takes place at a time when we are every day facing the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and a series of climate challenges that pose a difficult task for the future of the whole world. This is why it is so important to reach an agreement on how to accelerate global action against climate change in order to maintain the global temperature increase below 1.5 degrees Celsius.
NDC sa planom smanjenja emisije gasova sa efektom staklene bašte i to za 33,2% do 2000.
Each of our countries is facing different challenges. Regardless of that, it is necessary to be on the same page in the fight against climate change crisis and act together. It is also necessary to set realistic and achievable goals. Significant financial resources will be needed to implement these goals, especially in countries with lower GDP, such as Bosnia and Herzegovina. My country is making efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, in the coming period, we will have to invest more energy and more funds in order to achieve the goals we have set for ourselves. I am pleased to share with you today that Bosnia and Herzegovina submitted its updated nationally determined contribution to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in April this year, reaffirming its commitment to fulfilling the Paris Climate Agreement. By submitting this document, Bosnia and Herzegovina becomes one of the first countries in the West Balkans to adopt an updated NDC with a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 33.2% by 2030 and almost 66% by 2050. In order to meet our goals of climate change prevention, we are also working to enable the transition to sustainability, creating an attractive environment for the private sector, investment in clean, affordable energy. We will need substantial international assistance in the areas of technology transfer and development of financial mechanisms to encourage decarbonisation of the economy. The same goes for financial support to the climate issues projects. With the goal of further decarbonisation of the energy sector, Bosnia and Herzegovina signed the Sofia Declaration on the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans in November 2020. Thus, Bosnia and Herzegovina committed to work together with the EU to make Europe a climate-neutral continent by 2050. In that regard, one of our current most important activities is the development of our integrated national energy and climate plan for the period 2021-2030. This document aligns multiple objectives, those of the European Union in the field of energy and climate, those of the UNFCCC, and those of the Paris Agreement and the energy community. Thank you for your attention.
It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Surangel S. Whips, Jr., President of Palau. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Ali, and greetings, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Prime Minister, thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for holding this high-level platform and allowing us to set the stage for COP26. The latest IPCC report indicates that our collective action to date is not closing the emissions gap, and we are veering off the path to 1.5. The legend of WAB, the Palau legend of WAB, illustrates our state of emergency. WAB was a boy who grew into a giant that wouldn't stop growing. Due to his unruly appetite, the whole island community was forced to feed him. WAB's feeding depleted all the natural resources and finally he threatened to eat his people. To save themselves, the villagers banded together, took bold action, and set fire to him. This is eerily reminiscent of today's world, as large emitters, with their insatiable appetite for advancement, are continuing to abuse our environment, threatening our very survival. COP26 must light the fire. Excellencies, we must hold each other accountable. It is incumbent upon the parties of this convention to concentrate on radical action, consistent mobilization, intentional outcomes. As such, Palau expects the set of rules guiding the implementation of the Paris Agreement be finalized as a priority outcome of COP26. For Pacific SIDS, the Ocean Climate Biodiversity Nexus demands accountability for the NDC commitments, realistic timeframes, and to begin bold action by cutting in half our emissions by 2030 to flatten the curve and achieve net zero by 2050. As protectorates of the world's largest ocean and carbon sink, with the establishment of the Palau National Marine Sanctuary in 2015, we urge the formal integration of the ocean into the UNFCCC process through the global stocktake as a fundamental priority outcome of COP26. Ladies and gentlemen, the Convention must establish equitable access to climate financing and viable technological transfer for both mitigation and adaptation. We, the islands that are devastated most, demand that your commitments of $100 billion annually be increased to meet the $4 trillion the World Bank reports is needed, with substantial shares of climate financing to support costly adaptation needs. We see the scorching sun is giving us intolerable heat, the warming sea is invading us, the strong winds are blowing us every which way. Our resources are disappearing before our eyes, and our future is being robbed from us. Frankly speaking, there is no dignity to a slow and painful death. You might as well bomb our islands instead of making us suffer only to witness our slow and fateful demise. Leaders of the G20, we are drowning, and our only hope is the life ring you are holding. You must act now. We must act together, as we say in our Palauan chant. E wadamalasoyang alerubgaledeng maknit adatal bagal engungil endekadogoliyang. It says, when traveling in one canoe, Discord among the sailors will capsize the boat. The chant reminds us that we need to deliver on our commitments, and we must move in unison toward 1.5 to stay alive. The villagers burned the giant Uab, and as he fell to his death, he created over 300 islands of our islands. Bold, unified action led to transformation. We must act together. We owe this to each other, and we owe this to our children. Thank you, et Rahman Masulang.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Carlos Alvarado Quesada, the President of Costa Rica. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, delegates. I would like to begin by thanking the government of Chile for having steered the presidency of the COP through such a challenging and complex juncture, and also to thank the United Kingdom for all the hard work that has gone into making this COP26 possible. Before coming here, I was wondering, what can one possibly say to persuade and to convince the different leaders of the world that it is high time, more than time, to change, to shift. Despite all the words that have been spoken in the past, we are still well off track when it comes to protecting the planet. Rather, we are on a collision course.
Was a private company. Imagine that for a minute. And the leaders of the world were to be the different CEOs of the corporations. Today, we will all be fired, out of business. Why? Because we are off track. We are not delivering results. What happens in a company or in an NGO when leaders do not deliver the results they have committed, all the results that are expected from them? They are held accountable. So why is that not happening in the case of climate change and our goals? We know we are off target. And this endeavor is not any endeavor. We're talking about the future of our planet, the lives of our children and grandchildren. What is necessary in order for change to occur? It's the second time I have to speak in this forum after the honorable member of Palau. And it's heartbreaking and listen how state islands have to pledge for their existence. We need the developed world to put their act together. We need the large polluting economies to pull their act together. It's a matter of life and death. Leaders should be here. Leaders should listen. Leaders should deliver. That is why they are leaders. And that's the only way we'll manage to survive in this earth. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Muhammad Buhari, President of the Nigeria.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government. Mr. President, on behalf of the Nigerian delegation, I congratulate you on your election as the President of the 26th session of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and assure you of our full support as you lead our deliberations. I do not think anyone in Nigeria needs persuading of the need for urgent action on the environment. Desertification in the north, floods in the center, pollution and erosion on the coast are enough evidence. For Nigeria, climate change is not about the perils of tomorrow, but what is happening today. Nigeria is committed to net zero by 2060. In our lifetime, Lake Chad has gone from a vast expanse of biodiversity to a shadow of itself. We are investing in renewables, hydro dams, and solar projects. Nigeria is not looking to make the same mistakes that have been repeated for decades by others. We are looking for partners in innovation, technology, and finance to make cleaner and more efficient use of all available resources to help make for a more stable transition in energy markets. The revised nationally determined contribution has additional priority sectors: water and waste, nature-based solutions, adaptation and resilience, vulnerability assessment, and a clean cooking, gender, and green jobs assessment, bottom-up renewable energy transition pathway to 2030. Parties to the Paris Agreement are expected to transit from fossil fuel to clean energy and reach a net zero ambition for greenhouse gases emission. Nigeria is actually more of a gas than an oil-producing country. Consequently, I am requesting for financing of projects using transition fuels such as gas. Nigeria has developed a detailed energy transition plan and roadmap based on data and evidence. This plan has highlighted some key facts that faces the difficult conversations. Our transition plan also highlights the key role that gas will play in transitioning our economy across sectors, and the data and evidence shows that Nigeria can continue to use gas until 2040 without detracting from the goals of the Paris Agreement. Nigeria has an approved National Action Plan on Gender and Climate Change. This document incorporates priority areas of our economic recovery and growth plan and nationally determined contributions. The implementation strategy for this National Action Plan has been developed. In a bid to commit to transitional change through climate policy, the revised national policy on climate change was approved in June 2021. This will enable us to implement mitigation measures and also strengthen adaptation towards a sustainable climate resilient development pathway in Nigeria. Mr. President, I would like to state that attaining national and global climate change goals will require adequate and sustained technical and financial support to developing countries. In Nigeria, in the area of energy access, Nigeria's commitment to a just transition is reflected in our ambitious energy compact, which includes the government's flagship project to electrify 5 million households and 25 million people using decentralized solar energy solutions. This is a major step towards closing our energy excess deficit by 2030. I would like to state again that attaining national and global climate change goals will require adequate and sustained technical and financial support to developing countries. The outcome of this conference must result in a quick resolution of all outstanding issues pertaining to the finalization of the Paris Agreement rulebook, adaptation, mitigation, finance, Article 6, and loss and damage. I thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Emmerson Mnangagwa, President of Zimbabwe. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to commend the government and people of the United Kingdom for hosting COP26 and for extending an invitation to Zimbabwe to participate. I also congratulate Your Excellency, Mr. Sharma, on your election as the COP26 President. Zimbabwe has not been spared from climate change challenges, which have led to an increasing frequency of severe droughts and cyclone-induced floods. These, coupled with the economic sanctions imposed on us and the COVID-19 pandemic, have had negative impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the people of my country. The importance of solidarity and cooperation to tackling global challenges cannot be overemphasized. It is most unfortunate that the impact of climate change is disproportionately borne by the vulnerable communities which have contributed the least to the current stock of atmospheric carbon. Vulnerable countries must therefore be capacitated to mitigate, adapt, and build resilience to climate change. The expectation is that major emitters will scale up mitigation action and show greater interest in adaptation. Decisions at this COP26 should strengthen the implementation of current national determined contributions. It is further imperative that the said emission reduction targets are anchored on supporting, financing, and equipping countries to gradually and sustainably migrate from fossil to renewable energy. Notwithstanding that, as a country, we are a net sink. I'm pleased to highlight that Zimbabwe has revised its nationally determined contributions and committed to a conditional 40% per capita greenhouse gas emission reduction target by 2030. Comprehensive strategies are also being implemented towards mainstreaming climate change adaptation and resilience across all sectors of our economy. The removal of the illegal sanctions imposed on my country will undoubtedly enhance the timely achievement of our commitments. Zimbabwe is open for business, and my government stands ready to welcome and facilitate investments from across the world towards greening our economy and achieving sustainable development, which leaves no one and no place behind. Mr. President, the demonstration of sincerity and the good faith by members will help restore confidence in the new commitments made at this summit. Consensus on a clear roadmap for the new finance goal must be reached, while carbon trading needs to go beyond offsetting emissions to to more practical action on climate change mitigation. Finally, let us all show bold and decisive leadership in tackling this weighty responsibility before us. Zimbabwe stands ready to collaborate with all countries and partners within the Committee of Nations to achieve our noble objectives. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Giacomo C. Moncini and His Excellency Mr. Francesco Musori, Captains, Regent San Marino. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to express our thanks to the British and the Italian authorities for the excellent organization of this important event. The recent IPCC report confirmed that negative predictions are now a certainty. To quote United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the report is a code red for humanity. It will force us to take increasingly difficult choices. Good intentions cannot remain pious hopes. If political commitments taken during these days remain a dead letter, it will be an intolerable defeat. We recognize that the impacts of climate change at 1.5 degrees are much lower than at 2 degrees, and that immediately action must be taken to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. We acknowledge the close nexus between climate and energy, as well as we understand the importance of a just and inclusive clean energy transition. San Marino is a small state, but being small does not prevent us to be ambitious. We want to be an open-air laboratory where innovations by willing and fair-minded people are discussed, tested, and assessed on their effectiveness. It is indeed possible and necessary to start small in order to implement big change, to move one step at a time, but decisively. Therefore, we would like to call on small nations to join efforts to implement common initiatives that would otherwise be beyond their reach. We cannot but call on international organizations to devise new systems that will enable small states to make a stronger multilateral contribution. Together, we are stronger, as the history of the United Nations teaches us. San Marino wants to be active with other nations, no more than ever.
In July 2021, San Marino presented its first voluntary national review on the implementation of the 17 goals of the 2030 Agenda. We are currently drawing our action plan for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the first draft will be ready by the end of the year. Action to combat climate change under Goal 13 features prominently on the set of national initiatives. Virtuous policies we intend to implement are numerous, from the development of renewable sources to the promotion of electric and hybrid mobility. Measures to increase the energy efficiency of buildings, to contain emissions from companies, and to strengthen the national centralized data collection system are equally crucial. San Marino has made and is making its best efforts to respect the commitments deriving from all the very important agreements that have brought us this far. We know well, however, that it is not enough. If we do not act together, the consequences of our inaction will go far beyond state borders and will harshly affect next generations who are uniting in movements such as Fridays for Future. Young people are clamoring for just one thing, the courage to change. We owe them a credible answer because it is their future and we cannot prevent them to live in a better planet. thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of Comoros. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellence, Monsieur le Premier.
Your Excellencies, Prime Ministers, Your Excellency, President of the COP, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and heads of government, distinguished delegates, Assalamu alaikum. It is a genuine pleasure, indeed honor for me, to address this august assembly as we mark this very important COP26 summit. And I'd like to preface my remarks by addressing to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, as well as to the government and people of the United Kingdom, our sincere thanks and gratitude for the very warm and cordial welcome that we have received since arriving in this great and beautiful country. We'd also like to thank you for all that you have done to make our stay here so pleasant. I would like to congratulate the President of the COP for the trust that has been reposed in him, and I am firmly convinced that you will prove able to steer the work of this conference effectively and efficiently to ensure that we have a successful outcome. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, despite the actions undertaken by the international community since 1992, bringing us up to the Paris Agreement in 2015, global warming continues to pose an ever-growing threat to the whole of the world, to all of our countries. Climate change weighs heavily on the economic and social lives of our country, and I think that is something that is now well proven. And that is particularly true for small island developing states such as my own Comoros, which become ever more vulnerable. We live under the daily threat of various different catastrophes, including cyclones, droughts, erupting volcanoes, sea level rise. And the consequence of all of this is the weakening of the living standards and livelihoods of all of our people. We therefore bear a collective responsibility to strive to protect and preserve our environment. This is a joint responsibility. But we also need to recognize that many developing countries will not be able to achieve their greenhouse gas emission targets without the support of the international community. My country, the Comoros, has committed to an emission reduction campaign to cover the period up to 2030, and we have undertaken several important and meaningful actions intended to mitigate the adverse impact of climate change. This, for example, takes the guise of a campaign called One Comorian, One Tree, the objective of which campaign is to reforest at least 10% of the national territory. We hope through this campaign to increase the land surface of our country that is forested as a protection measure in order to ensure that by 2030, 30% of Comorian land is forested. We will need financing for these actions, but we will also need capacity building support and technology transfer and skill transfer support in order to achieve our objectives, and we count on that. The outcome of this summit, President, is vital for each and every one of us. The time has come for us to give fresh momentum and to re-galvanize our common endeavor through the actual meaningful implementation of the decisions taken in the Paris Agreement. To achieve that goal, we need to ensure that the various funds that were set up and provided for are actually made available on a standing basis, and they actually have financing within that can be dispersed, and that we, developing countries such as my own, can access those funds without any stumbling blocks and any obstacles, and that the monies dispersed through these funds will be earmarked to the priorities set by the recipient countries themselves. We must continue the fight against climate change, and it's in that understanding that my country has rolled out a geothermal development strategy. as well as a solar energy strategy in order to provide for the highest percentage possible of the electricity needs of our country. President, the eyes of the world are fixed upon the United Kingdom and upon the outcomes of this COP26. The expectations that our peoples are pinning on this conference are enormous, and we cannot let them down. Let us make COP26 a summit for action, a summit in which we set aside our differences, and a summit in which we can lay aside poverty, and which strikes hard at so many countries and regions around the world. Let international cooperation be the hallmark of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Carlos Manuel Villanova, President of Sao Tome and Principe. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellence.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, humanity is facing a challenge and we must act together. And this challenge can only be tackled through tangible action. On one hand, the COVID-19 pandemic. On the other hand, the entire world is facing unprecedented weather and climate phenomena. COVID-19 has taught the world that when we do not act in a united and coordinated manner, it takes much more time to control and put an end to the pandemic. Climate change and its impact are another kind of pandemic that is spreading throughout the world, affecting rich and poor countries alike, without discrimination. Even though the lack of means and resources to manage the crisis mainly affects the poorest nations of our planet. I come from a country where one of the islands, that's to say Principe, is part of the World Network of Biosphere Reserves, but even this reserve is under threat, because the surface area of the archipelago used to be 1,001 square kilometers, but today it is only 960 square kilometers. That means that 4% of its land has been swallowed up by sea level rise caused by climate change. Wildfires, heat waves, sea level rise, devastating flooding, they are already affecting many regions of the world. We must understand that we are all paying the price today, regardless of who the largest polluters are, regardless of our culpability in the degradation of the environment. Extreme sea level events that used to take place once every 100 years may be happening every year by the end of this century. Given these drastic consequences, vulnerable nations and small island developing states have become increasingly frustrated because our appeals for and our needs for cooperation have gone unheeded by other countries, richer nations, and the G20, the largest polluters. This is why I call on all the nations of the world to take more ambitious measures to protect our climate. In addition, financial commitments are lagging behind. Developed countries are hampering the ability of poor and vulnerable countries, such as Sao Tome and Principe, to implement measures for climate resilience and for a transition toward carbon-neutral, sustainable economies. Therefore, we call for the immediate fulfillment of funding promises and for the allocation of the agreed-upon $100 billion per year to address climate challenges. Sao Tome and Principe has seen little progress when it comes to adaptation to climate change. It needs significant and immediate aid to continue to strengthen the resilience of the most vulnerable communities. We have a strategy for a transition toward renewable energy and a blue economy. But what good will it be if we don't have the means to implement it? And we are racing against the clock. In updating our nationally determined contributions to include both mitigation measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adaptation measures to increase resilience in the most vulnerable communities, we have shown the importance of accelerated ambition and therefore take this opportunity to issue a call to action. Sao Tome and Principe is committed to fighting climate change. Increasingly, the peoples who are the hardest hit by the effects of climate change are becoming aware of the risk that humanity is facing and recognize that the only option is to fight to reverse the impacts of climate change. Therefore, I wish you all good luck, and I hope that by the time the next conference comes around, we will have reasons to be optimistic and tangible progress to speak of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Armen Pashinyan, President of Armenia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and my family name is Sarkisyan. And Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Her Majesty and Her Majesty's government for organizing this significant and timely event. Special thanks to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, his colleagues, and the City of Glasgow for excellent summit and warm hospitality. First, about Armenia, a small state and a global nation. According to the World Bank analysis, Armenia is the fourth most vulnerable country to climate change in Eastern Europe and Central Asia region. Armenia has registered a 1.3 degrees Celsius increase in temperature and 9% decrease in precipitation. Despite the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, we are committed to stronger integration into the global agenda on climate change and to demonstrate an increase in our climate ambition. Armenia has constantly expressed its commitment to joining global efforts to combat climate change. In 2021, Armenia reaffirmed our commitment through the NDC and declared an objective 40% reduction of its greenhouse gas emission by 2030 compared to the 1990. The long objective of Armenia is to achieve climate neutrality in the second half of the century. Transition to climate neutrality is an core of the country's energy independence, energy security, and green growth policy. Our vision of resilient and low-carbon growth is directly connected to a solid and effective adaptation strategy that is based on an ecosystem approach, reforestation, investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency, new high technologies, promotion of electric mobility, and further development of nuclear energy. Dear colleagues, substantial public debt burdens most developing economies and their ability to access concessional and non-concessional climate finance. In this regard, a creative approach is crucial. I am delighted to share with you our renewed Debt for Climate Swap initiative. It presents a new climate finance investment instrument, and it will help developing countries to adapt more efficiently to climate change finance and will provide new economic opportunities. Mr. President, exactly 1 year ago, during its war against Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan used internationally banned weapons to target not only civilians but also beautiful forests of the large area, causing massive forest fires and creating environmental disasters in place. We call all international community to step up to its efforts to prevent such irresponsible, inhuman behavior. The environmental challenges do not recognize borders and conflict lines, and we should bring all states of the world into comprehensive cooperation. Now, just a couple of words about this conference. I thoroughly enjoyed the opening of the conference, enjoyed speeches of my colleagues from worldwide, and it was confirmed by everybody here that there is a big problem, which is the climate change. But that's not the only problem that we have these days, because we're facing also pandemic, we're facing economic difficulties, and we are worldwide, and we're facing rise of populism, we're facing uncertainty, we're also facing unpredictability here. But on the other side, having all of these problems, we have also recognized here globally that there's huge wealth, and that wealth is in trillions of dollars that could resolve the issue. And on the other side, during the 100 years of development based on quantum technology and quantum physics, we have achieved phenomenal achievements in science and technology. And that technology today can resolve our problems, be that in climate change, be that in COVID and other problems that we are facing. So where is the problem? Why we are not so effective or efficient? I think there is one thing that we should learn from the history of science. When 100 years ago, great scientists, people like Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Heisenberg, realized that the classical laws of physics and mechanics, cannot be applied to the new discovered small particles and atoms. You have to change your mentality. You have to change your philosophy, your logic, even your common sense to understand and create the theory of quantum physics. We are on the crossroad. The world has become quantum. This is a crossroad that we have to start thinking differently, because the world that ahead of us is not the one that was there 10 or 20 years ago. So based on that, if we change our mentality, form our ambition and strategy, then we can effectively use the finances and the wealth created during this phenomenal development and use the technology to handle the problems that we are facing. But not only resolve the problems, but also create a basis of development to the brighter future years to come. And with finally, at the opening of summit, Professor Brian Cox took us to a trip to Cosmos to see from above how amazingly beautiful this planet is, and to realize that in the whole universe, this is our home and the only one. And there is no other alternative for us but to work and to fight for this green and blue planet. Armenia is committed to become a really smart state, devoted to our nature, planet, and humanity. And I'm optimistic that we can overcome this difficulty and build a brighter future for all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Commending my friend Boris for his leadership in hosting the COP26. I will be speaking in Japanese from now on, so may I ask you to put on your headphones. 気候変動という
I have come all the way to Glasgow to convey my determination that Japan will be working in full force to take on climate change, a common challenge of humankind. 6 years have passed since the adoption of the Paris Agreement. At that time, under the leadership of then-President Laurent Fabius, we had renewed our resolve. We must not forget that very moment. Fumio, I really want to give this to you. To this day, I have been keeping and cherishing the gavel that my friend Laurent presented to me As a testament to my own resolution to confront the climate change issue seriously, to achieve our goal, this coming decade will be critical. Together, with high ambitions, let us do all we can going forward. Net zero by 2050. Japan will realize this goal under our newly adopted long-term strategy. I assure you that Japan aims to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in fiscal year 2030 from its fiscal year 2013 levels, and that Japan will continue strenuous efforts in its challenge to meet the lofty goal of cutting its emissions by 50%. Mr. President, to bring about a decarbonized society, Japan will introduce renewable energy as much as possible and lead the way in the clean energy transition with a particular focus on Asia. Since solar power plays a major role in the transition to renewables in Asia, to stabilize electrical frequency, converting existing thermal power to zero-emission power generation is a necessary path. To this end, Japan, through the Asia Energy Transition Initiative, will develop leading projects worth $100 million to transform fossil fuel-fired thermal power into zero-emission thermal power based on such substances as ammonia and hydrogen. Developed countries had collectively committed to the $100 billion per year goal of climate finance. This target remains unmet. To take the lead in filling this financial gap today, I am pleased to announce our additional contribution. On top of the support worth $60 billion both in public and private finance for the next 5 years, which was announced last June, Japan will provide up to $10 billion in the coming 5 years, which would include our contribution to the launch of the innovative financial facility for climate as we partner with the Asian Development Bank and others to support the decarbonization of Asia and beyond. Together with Boris, Japan will call on other developed countries to join us in our collective efforts. Capitalizing on these initiatives, Japan will press onward to undertake efforts towards net zero emissions in Asia, the engine of global economic growth. With an aim to realizing a future where vehicles, the world's essentials, will become zero emission, Japan will take advantage of all available technological options. By utilizing our 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund, Japan will develop next-generation batteries and motors, hydrogen and synthetic fuels, which all hold the key to the spread of electric vehicles. While distributing the fruits of these innovations across Asia, Japan will spearhead global efforts. We will be participating in the Global Methane Pledge. As we move forward in the transition to decarbonization, the ongoing issue of rising energy prices also calls for joint discussions amongst ourselves as leaders to meet the challenge. For adaptation to climate change, Japan will double our assistance to approximately $14.8 billion to cover such areas as disaster risk reduction. Concerning global forestry conservation, I hereby announce that Japan will provide financial assistance worth approximately $240 million, utilizing advanced technologies and working in collaboration with international organizations. No one must be left behind as we confront the issue of climate change. Japan will dedicate all its strength to undertake actions and contribute to the future of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Catherine Ri Jacobs Doughty, Prime Minister of Iceland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we have received new guidance from science before this meeting, and the evidence is stronger than ever. Our combined Paris pledges will not suffice to keep global warming within safe limits, and we must upgrade. Iceland announced last year an upgrade of our ambition level from 40% to 55% emission cuts to 2030, and we will achieve this goal in cooperation with EU and Norway. Earlier this year, the Icelandic Parliament made our previously announced goal of carbon neutrality by 2040 legally binding, one of few countries that has taken this step. We are working on a roadmap to carbon neutrality. A big step on that journey is our newly released long-term low-emission strategy in line with the Paris Agreement. Iceland has also set a goal of quitting fossil fuel use by 2050, and last September we published our first adaptation strategy. The parties who are now forming a new government in Iceland are currently discussing ways to strengthen our goals, our 2030 target, while ensuring a just transition towards a greener economy. In climate mitigation, we believe we are on the right track, but we want to do better still. As part of its renewed NDC, Iceland has increased its year-on-year funding for climate-related development programs and projects significantly and continues to do so. And we have also some good stories to tell in Iceland. 100% renewable energy for heating and electricity, second in the world in the share of clean cars in total sales. But we need to do more. We need clean energy transition to extend to ships and airplanes, and being an island, this is particularly relevant. We must do better in nature-based solutions. In the last 3 years or so, we have doubled our efforts, but still we need to do more there. We must look for negative emissions and new technology. And just 2 months ago, the world's biggest direct air capture and storage plant opened in Iceland. There, the CO2 is being pumped in the basalt ground where it is petrified. And we hope that this is a small step towards something very much bigger, a technology that can prove useful for the whole world. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to recite to you the words of an Icelandic author, Andri Snær Magnason, who said in his book on climate, "Your time is the time of the people you know and love, the time that molds you. And your time is also the time of the people you will know and love. The time that you will shape. Everything you do matters. You create the future every single day." His words are true. The time to create the future is now, today. Young people are pressing for actions, and we must heed their call. And I also want to underscore the importance of gender equality in our discourse, because we must involve women and girls in all aspects of climate action and decisions. We need the energy and ingenuity of all humankind. The signs of climate disruption are ominous. We see emergencies around the world that are a direct consequence of the climate crisis. In Iceland, we see our glaciers receding. We worry about the change of chemistry and circulation in our oceans in ways that could disrupt the entire marine ecosystem. But there are also signs of progress that give ground for hope and optimism. The promise of the Paris Agreement is alive and well, and I sense a great ambition here in Glasgow. There is demanding work ahead, but it can be good work as well. Green transition can and must be the growth story of the 21st century. Save the day and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, heads of government, we gather today at a pivotal point in the history of humanity in a further attempt to deepen commitment and determination to mitigate the efforts of climate change. The August 2021 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has presented a sobering outlook and brought into focus the severe shortfall in closing the emissions gap. Any temperature increase beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius level will have long-term and permanent consequences, particularly for small countries and economies such as Trinidad and Tobago. The only solution, therefore, is to increase collective ambition. According to the World Energy Outlook, in order for the world to shift from our current unsustainable path, We need to focus on driving renewable and sustainable electrification, improving efficiency, reducing methane emissions, and turbocharging innovation. We also need to implement strategies and unlock the capital flows in support of energy transitions and ensure reliability and affordability. Mr. President, while mitigation ambition is driven by the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, the global goal on adaptation has failed to achieve a commensurate level of attention and action. At COP26, we must ensure that we have an outcome that helps to raise adaptation, ambition, and action. Establishing a specific work program after COP26 to define the details for the global goal and adaptation will be the key. Trinidad and Tobago is a small island developing state already experiencing the effects of climate change. Loss and damage are already clear in the aggressive erosion of our coastline and the bleaching of our coral reefs. Tackling loss and damage must remain a critical and core issue of any global climate action framework. We are increasingly concerned about our ability to address this issue, given the well-known difficulty in accessing financing for such projects. We need funds like the Green Climate Fund to establish specific streams for loss and damage finance to ensure that this is prioritized in the same way as mitigation and adaptation. Further, there must be equitable balance between public finance for mitigation and adaptation. COP26 will be a critical point at which we can assess whether our climate finance flows are headed in the right direction. In this regard, the United States' announcement that it would double its climate finance support is particularly inspiring. This is the type of bold action all donor countries need to consider in the weeks ahead. The mobilization of private finance will also be critical for securing the urgently needed investment, particularly for the transformation of our energy sectors. Mr. President, we must complete the work to implement the energy transparency framework. Even as a small country with limited resources, we will make every effort to report to the required standard, with some assistance, of course. We expect others to do the same. This is the deal we made in Paris. We cannot go back on it now. Mr. President, as an economy largely based on oil and gas and petrochemicals, we in Trinidad and Tobago recognize our responsibility in transitioning over reasonable and manageable time to net zero. We have set very ambitious targets aimed at diversifying our economy. We have embarked upon ambitious plans to reduce emissions and build climate resilience, but we will need help. These measures include the following. We are in the process of establishing the largest utility-scale solar renewable energy project in the Caribbean, with a capacity of 112 megawatts, accounting for 10% of our power needs, and we plan to increase this complement to 30% by 2030. We have developed an e-mobility policy, and we are already implementing measures to phase in electric vehicles. We recognize the need to address the socio-economic issues associated with energy transition, and have developed a just transition of the workforce policy aimed at reskilling, retooling, and developing new capacity for a low-carbon economy. We are pursuing measures to facilitate investments in green hydrogen, to provide green feedstock to our vibrant petrochemical industry. We intend to explore the use of industry-generated carbon dioxide in possible carbon sequestration projects. Mr. President, COP26 has created great expectations and heightened hopes for climate ambition for Trinidad and Tobago. This ambition includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions and providing much-needed climate finance to enable vulnerable countries to adapt to climate impacts and assist in transforming their economies to more sustainable, low-carbon paths. Beyond the rhetoric and pledges, every country needs to be serious about urgent action in this decade. Trinidad and Tobago is committed to working with all countries in the multilateral framework to ensure a safe and secure world for those yet to be born. It is my sincere hope that we will be able to look back at COP26 and the commitments and progress made here in Glasgow and key steps towards a healthier, salvageable planet Earth. Let's work for survival of ours and all species. Let's not choose extinction. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Jonas Kjærstra, Prime Minister of Norway. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Norway comes to Glasgow with one overriding ambition: helping keep the 1.5-degree target alive. This is existential, it is urgent, and it is possible if we jointly step up our commitments. I commend those that have enhanced their targets. The new Norwegian government has done so. I urge all remaining countries, especially the large emitters, to follow suit. Norway will reduce its emissions, and we will help others to cut theirs and adapt. There is no trade-off between mitigation and adaptation. We can succeed both. We come to Glasgow with 3 firm commitments. First, we will follow up on the invitation by the British hosts. We are ready to double our climate financing contribution to more than $1.6 billion by 2026, thus contributing significantly to reaching the $100 billion target set in Paris. And in doing so, we will invite private capital to join us in mobilizing necessary resources. As part of our contribution, we will, as a minimum, triple our adaptation finance. How can this contribution, Mr. President, make a real difference? Norway will work with development partners to help finance their transition to renewable energy. We will support investments that can help phase out coal and other fossil sources. We will launch a new climate investment initiative to fund renewable energy in developing countries. And we will continue our efforts to preserve tropical forests and promote sustainable forestry and agriculture. And we are making progress here at this conference. Second, Mr. President, it will be a priority for my government and for me as Prime Minister to work with business, industry and the social partners to help us all succeed the transition towards renewable, circular and sustainable future. This transition will make a difference in Norway, but our ambition goes further. We aim to develop and export technology that can be of use beyond our borders. Norway is positioned to take a lead in developing ocean-based solutions such as offshore wind, green shipping, carbon capture, utilization and storage, hydrogen and electrical mobility. We will harness market forces. Our active industrial policy will support technologies reach their tipping points. In doing so, correct carbon pricing is essential. Open markets and international trade will also be crucial. And finally, Mr. President, third point, the financial sector must play its part. Norway's public pension fund Global is the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, invested worldwide. Our goal is to make it the leading fund in responsible investment and the management of climate risk. Climate risk is indeed a financial risk and needs to be managed as such. As a responsible investor, the fund will base its ownership work on an overall long-term goal of net zero emissions from the companies it invests in. So, friends, we cannot allow the inaction of some to be an argument for failing to take action together by the rest of us. Now is the time to step up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
I'm probably the tallest here, but from one of the smallest countries, Albania. My fellow citizens and I look up to your countries as models of good government. In important events such as this one, we are told what to do. We tend to listen and take notes. And so I've listened and I've taken my notes. But the question with which I came here has not been answered yet. Perhaps it has not occurred to anyone. So I thought I'd make it clear. How do the big polluters intend to help us? A non-polluter. Yes, a non-polluter. Our energy production is based on renewables, 100%. Zero fossil fuels. We do not just pledge to meet the common challenge of commitments made and targets set. We do it today, 2021. But we are not self-sufficient, so we have to import energy. And therefore, we import pollution. And our small country asks, how long do we have to continue to do the right thing just alone? How long do we have to pay the price? First, for the contribution to climate change of the big guys. Then, for their failure to remedy its consequences. We could have taken all the lucrative offers for coal thermal plants that we have received over the years. They would have helped us to balance our dry seasons in a country relying 100% on hydropower. When the lack of rain obliged us to go to the market and buy very expensive energy from the big guys. I'm proud we did not. But now, my small country looks at what is going on here and sees how the biggest polluters get also the biggest chunks of the money. Guess what? To assist us to deal with climate change. Now that winter nears, our budget is bleeding because we have to buy in energy and prices skyrocket. Moreover, because it has been so dry, our hydropower plants cannot meet our needs. And so we are caught between the Sheila of wishing to have rain for our electricity production and the Charybdis of risking devastating floods that erode massive chunks of our small rural economy. The climate crisis in action. So my small country says to itself, you are 100% renewable, yes, but what's the answer for the families and the small businesses who cannot afford to pay even higher bills for their electricity consumption? Are we paying a price for doing the right thing? We cannot wait around to see if the markets move quickly in the right direction. I hope that here will be delivered on the promises of finance to support low and middle income countries, starting from the clean energy role models like Albania. This financing must not come in the form of loans that entrap our countries in cycles of debt, but through grants that empower us to invest. And I hope the support will not continue to mean endless studies and strategies which impact far less than it costs to pay people from rich countries to draft them. It is a noble stance to refuse any mixing with fossil fuel of our 100% renewable energy production. Some of the guys here may be able to afford it. For us, it is literally a daily struggle. The model is not affordable if it is not supported from richer and more powerful countries. I'm aware that the future of climate initiatives does not depend on how they affect Albania and others like Albania, but the lack of action of the big polluters affect us, and many like us who pay the price for the profits of the big polluters. I started by saying that we look up to countries big countries as models of good government. I hope we won't come to realize that this was a big mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, we will continue with the delivery of national statements today at 1500 hours in this plenary. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP and the CMA adjourned. Now that we have finished the high-level segment of today, we will have a short interval where we will welcome African leaders involved with climate investment on the stage. I would like now to welcome Seni Nafo, co-chair of the African Green Finance Coalition, Ukur Yatani, Cabinet Secretary, Kenya Treasury Representative Co-Chair, AGFC, and Ayanzen Abadan, Senior Director and Chief Executive Officer, AFC Capital Partners, to the stage on the theme of financing the transition in Africa.
Thank you. For the past 4 years, Kenya has been proud to act as a co-convener at the African NDA Green Climate Finance Network, which was set up to help channel